Vyacheslav dialed his wife's number. "Alina, I'll meet you today after work," he said when she picked up the phone. "Vyacheslav, yes, stop worrying so much. I will calmly drive with the girls," his wife replied. "Marinka has a car. We are one way. All I have to go back to work. Bye." My husband sighed and hung up. Maybe he really worried too much and should stop pushing his wife so much. But there were some pretty good reasons for that too. Alina worked as a manager at a large firm. 6 months ago, the staff needed to expand, and the company hired several more managers on the project. Among them was Ivan, a very perky and persistent man, at times even overconfident. He quickly joined the team, tried to fill the space everywhere, jumping into every conversation. At first, his attention was scattered to all his colleagues. But over the past couple of weeks, he began to give it often to Alina. Vyacheslav first learned about it from her words when she began to share with her husband interesting stories that her colleague was poisoning, and then he saw himself escorting her out of the office building. The car was under repair that evening, and Vyacheslav walked to his wife's place of work so she wouldn't have to walk alone through the dark streets. He saw this Ivan opening the glass front door in front of Alina, jokingly leaning over and holding his hand forward as if to show that he was letting the queen through. Alina laughed embarrassedly, and Ivan, supporting the woman by the elbow, helped her down the stairs, then issued another joke and bowed out. Then she saw her husband. "Yes, our Vanya is very funny," she said, smiling. "That buffoon of a P is making a pass at you," said her husband dryly. "Oh yes, stop it, he is always like that. We're just friends. Well, let's go home." Vyacheslav did not believe in friendship between a man and a woman. This Ivan is just blowing dust in her eyes, and she naively thinks it's purely amicable. Since then, the man tried every day to meet his wife from work, and specifically waited in the lobby, so that this annoying colleague, first, saw that she at all. That is her husband, and he is near, and secondly, kept his distance and did not touch Alina. At one time, the woman was pleased with such attention from her husband. But then she felt like she was on a short leash and asked her husband not to push her so hard. She asked him to calm down and not to think too much. After all, she married him, and this is just a colleague, which thus joins the team. Especially since he is not alone in communicating with Alina. Vyacheslav understood everything, tried to control himself, but sometimes it was not very successful. One day, the situation got out of control, and he snapped. One evening, the doorbell rang. Vyacheslav opened the door and saw the courier. "Hello, there is a parcel for you," joyfully said the young man. "But I did not order anything." He looked at the box with surprise. "It is a present, there is a note." The courier handed the man the box and left. Vyacheslav took the note in his hands and read, "Beautiful Alina, your hands do wonders." And in the box itself, there was a set of fruit. At that time, Alina had just come out of the kitchen to see who had come in. "You can explain it to me," her husband said through gritted teeth, handing her the note. The woman took it, read it several times, staring perplexedly at one point, and then laughed. "And so it's from Vanya." She did not have time to continue the sentence when her husband began to shout. "Oh, from Vanya? Have you gone completely mad? And what miracles did your hands manage to do, huh?" The man threw the box against the wall with force. "Vyacheslav, what are you doing?" Alina really got scared. The program on his work computer froze. I came and fixed it. And what are you thinking? Why the hell does he allow himself to give gifts to a married woman? You tell me. The husband didn't calm down. "You can't thank me for my help now, can you? Just because I'm married, right?" Now Alina was angry too. The spouses went to different rooms to cool down. Later, Vyacheslav understood that it was not the present that made him angry, but the ambivalent content of the note to it. It was as if it had been done on purpose. After all, this Ivan absolutely knew that her husband would read it, and of course he would have questions. After a couple of days, the quarrel began to be forgotten. Everything was going back to normal. Vyacheslav got many orders. He worked as a sound engineer at various events. Some were just making sure that the musicians sounded good. Some were taking part-time jobs and putting on music at festivals. There was a lot of work, so the man was distracted from constantly watching his wife and annoying colleague. And then one day, Alina said that she had a corporate party planned at work on the occasion of the company's anniversary. She had to choose a dress and jewelry because all the girls from her department would wear the best, and Alina did not want to fall behind them. Needless to say, her husband did not like the idea at once. Not because of the outfit, no, but because of the specifics of his work. He had already seen all these corporate parties, and they did not inspire him confidence. Informal atmosphere, a lot of alcohol. Some people just get their hands free at such events. Vyacheslav, as gently as possible, asked his wife to skip this event because he was very worried about her. He suggested that we go out together instead. That's how usually you do not invite me anywhere. And here you have. Alina was outraged. Because of your completely contrived concerns, I have to miss a general celebration. Are you serious? Vyacheslav is totally selfish, don't you think? My husband knew how this looked. That's why he didn't choose the "I'm your husband, I forbid you" tactic. Yes, this whole conversation was about what he was worried about. Honey, please, Glory sighed, at least stay away from this guy, okay? From the beginning would be so Vyacheslav. Do not worry, please. Everything will be fine. I plan to dance only with the girls. The husband calmed down a little. He did not want to quarrel with his wife even more, so he ended this conversation. The day of the corporate party came. Alina went to the beauty salon in the afternoon to get her hair done. Vyacheslav had a canceled event that day, so he stayed at home and decided to take up one of his acquaintances' musical projects in his free time. He needed to mix a couple of tracks for their new album. After seeing his wife off, he sat down to work. Toward evening, a notification appeared on his phone. He was subscribed to a mailing list of hot jobs for recording engineers. Just came one ad: urgently need a sound engineer for a corporate party tonight. For urgency, we will pay extra. The last performer was sick. Vyacheslav looked at the name of the customer, the address of the corporate party. That's right, Alina's company. The man immediately responded. The friend's project would have to wait. He needed to make sure that his wife was okay, he reassured himself. In fact, deep down inside, he had his doubts. The company did not require a dress code for the performer. The sound engineer was not usually very visible. So the man wore a voluminous hooded sweatshirt and dark jeans, and it was comfortable, and no one would recognize him. Vyacheslav entered the hall, covering himself with the hood. His seat was at the very end of the room, so he could observe the entire venue and the guests. At the beginning of the evening, there were speeches of the first persons of the company, congratulations and thanks to the employees. Then the official part was over, and a group of musicians came on stage. We just had to adjust the sound. There were no problems with it. The man also had time to watch the guests of the party. Most were seated at the tables for the time being. Glasses were clinking everywhere, people were talking, and some came out to dance. Vyacheslav saw his wife. She was sitting at a table closer to the stage, surrounded by girls from her department. They were chatting and laughing merrily. Maybe I really worried for nothing. Alina really only sits with the girls, thought the husband. After a couple of hours, the musicians' performance was over. Someone from the company treated them to refreshments, and the guys, having gathered their instruments, left. Now they just had to put on some dance music so the employees wouldn't get bored. It was obvious that everyone was having enough fun as it was. The temperature of the party was only rising when the drinks were heavy. The guests got up from their seats and started dancing. It looked amusing. Vyacheslav even laughed. Someone was no longer quite on his feet. He lost sight of his wife for a while, and while he looked into the hall, some girl came up to him with a plate of snacks in her hands. "Hello, handsome. You must be hungry." The stranger tried to pronounce the words clearly, but did not succeed. It was obvious that she was drunk. She put the plate next to Vyacheslav and leaned closer, trying to shout out the music. "And you're here alone, aren't you?" "You know, I've always liked creative people." "Girl, I'm at work, and I'm married. I don't need introductions, sorry." Surprised, the stranger fluttered her arms and left. The man continued to look for Alina. Finally, he found her. But what he saw only upset him. She somehow returned to the hall, and not alone. Ivan was supporting her by the hand. With a cheeky smile, he led Alina into the middle of the hall and began to dance with her. The wife laughed and just hung on the neck of her colleague. Vyacheslav began to slowly boil over. How could she behave like that? Where were the two of them? After a minute, Ivan had already started to frankly groff her, and she just kept laughing. The husband just can't believe his eyes. So all those entreaties not to get nervous were nothing. He knew it was all for a reason. Vyacheslav pulled himself together. Everything inside him was boiling. He was ready to jump out of his seat and deal with Ivan right there. But he could not behave so unprofessionally and end this evening by calling an ambulance and the police. He held back. He'd have time to sort it out. With all these worries, the man had completely forgotten about his work. After a rather upbeat song, a very slow song began to play. The music brought him out of his own thoughts. It was the song he and his wife had danced to at their wedding. It was their song. It meant a lot to both of them. Alina listened to the music too. Ivan had already prepared for the slow dance, but she broke free from his embrace, and finally looked in the direction where Vyacheslav was sitting. She recognized him. In her eyes read despair, uneven step, a little swaying, she headed toward her husband. Tears were already glistening in her eyes. He looked at her coldly and shook his head. She realized that this was the end. Of course, Vyacheslav would not forgive his wife for such behavior. After all the events followed the scandal and then the divorce. But before that, he still dealt man to man with the negligent beau of his wife, so that the scoundrel knows that such actions do not go unpunished. The next story is no less interesting. It tells the story of how a competitor first took the business and then the wife. Be sure to see it through to the end. There is a very interesting denouement to this story. Mary was only 20 years old when she met Frank. He had turned 43. He owned his own business and was quite a well-known man in their not-so-small town. The services of his company were used by many, which kept him afloat for many years. Mary was working in a modeling agency at the time and participated in various fashion shows. At one party after such a show, she met Frank. She was immediately attracted to him, and she spent the whole evening spinning in front of him to get his attention. And she did it perfectly. She was hard not to notice among the other girls, and Frank did not waste her time. He wooed her beautifully, gave flowers, arranged various surprises, and in general, he did not spare money on Mary. And she immediately realized that she could not miss such a man. Frank was good-looking, played sports, was rather handsome, and what was important for Mary, the man was rich. So a year after they met, they had a fancy wedding and went on a honeymoon to the sea. That same year, Mary graduated from university and received her degree, but she had no plans to work. She even quit modeling because she felt that the wife of a man like Frank should not work. Her husband was fine with that. He assumed such an outcome and didn't insist otherwise. "Enjoy it as long as I can let you," he always told his wife. He didn't know it yet, but those words were in some ways prophetic. Despite her young age, Mary tried to be exemplary. She liked to go out with her friends, to go shopping, but she tried not to forget that she had a family now, and she was needed there too. Sometimes Frank even insisted that Mary go out with her friends. He wanted to prove to her that he didn't need a perfect wife, but a loving and happy one, very much so. At one point, Frank had a competitor in the business who brazenly tried to ruin it. He began to fight for his business, which he had been building for years and had put his whole soul into it. Eventually, her husband ran into money problems, something Mary never expected. "Frank, we hadn't been to the seaside in a year," she said to her husband one evening. "You know, I'm not having the best of times." "I can't contribute as much money as I used to," Frank said. Mary was not satisfied with that answer and became angry with her husband. Eventually, he couldn't take it anymore and yelled back at her. And then, angry, he left to spend the night at the office. In the morning, Frank regretted the scandal. He considered his wife not at fault, for he himself had instilled in her a taste for a certain way of life. He returned home with a bouquet and an apology, which Mary reluctantly accepted. One day, after a hard day's work, Frank was sitting at work, drinking coffee. He should have been on his way home, but he delayed the moment. Suddenly, he heard that he had received an email from a strange address. It contained a small text and 2 pictures. On one of them was Mary getting out of a car. On the other, she was sitting in a restaurant with a man. The stranger had his back to the camera, so that Frank could not see his face. He immediately had 2 questions. Who was the man? And who would want to spy on Mary all of a sudden? The letter did not answer these questions. There were only 2 short phrases. "This is for the good of your business, kind anonymous." At home, Frank was careful to ask Mary questions. Where was she today? What were you doing today? Without a second thought, she answered that she had seen an old boss from the agency. And Frank calmed down a little. But Mary did begin to date a man at Frank's bewilderment, who began to severely restrict her spending. Her suitor's name was Ford. All Mary knew about him was that he was single and that he also had his own business. They met in a bar, where Mary complained to her friends about her husband. All her complaints usually boiled down to one thing: money. "It's like you're only with him for that." Mary was condemned by her friend. Not only because of that, she excused herself, but his earnings are an important point in our relationship. I do not want, like a beggar, to count pennies. The friends who did not have such a sponsor looked at each other and rolled their eyes. "You're just cheeky," said her friend Lena. "Frank is the perfect partner." Mary grinned. "Well, you can have him." That same night, already quite drunk, Mary admitted to her friends that another man was courting her, and she didn't forbid it. On the contrary, she was very happy about it. "We even had a braided tongue already in his car," Mary reported. Lena was shocked by her friend and cut off all communication with her after that meeting. After a few months of struggling for business, Frank realized he wasn't getting anywhere. The people hired specifically for this purpose were not helping, and his business was going under. He realized that it was better to sell the business now and get something out of it, than to drag it out to the last minute and be left with nothing. So Frank voluntarily put his brainchild in the hands of a competitor. When Frank informed his wife of his decision, she was so angry that she started to throw dishes at her husband, screaming that they were going to be broke and would soon go to hell. Frank was hurt that the woman he loved did not support him at such an important time. He said this to Mary, but she only sighed and said that it was his own fault for bending to the competition, and that she was not going to pity him for that. But as it turned out, it was not only Frank who buckled under his competitor. 2 weeks later, he received a new letter with pictures. Now they showed not only Mary, but also the man who was sitting with her. The man in the picture turned out to be none other than Ford, the same man who had ruined Frank's business. With the next letter, the kindly anonymous man leaked the location of his woman, and now Frank was standing outside the reception room of his chief enemy, looking through the glass door at his wife, who was pleasuring Ford. A plan for revenge was born instantly in his mind, and Frank decided he had nothing to lose. He snapped a picture of the couple and swung the door open. Ford recoiled sharply away from Mary. The woman was also greatly frightened. Frank took another picture of the half-naked lovers standing with frightened faces and looking at him. He punched Ford in the face with all his might. "This is for business and for her." He nodded toward his wife. "And you, Frank swore at Mary can have no hope of forgiveness. I hope you don't need it. Get your things off the street, if you can, of course. So he turned around and walked quickly out of Ford's office. His pulse pounded loudly in his ears and his hands were shaking. But it was as if a stone had fallen from Frank's soul, which was pulling him to the bottom, and his breathing became easier. A kind anonymous friend, Alina, decided to keep Frank away from his good-for-nothing wife at all costs. She spared no money for a private detective, who began at her request to send Frank a photo of Mary. She later confessed it to him, and Frank invited her to dinner in gratitude. Subsequently, he realized what it was like to be loved for nothing and not for something. That night, when Frank found his wife at his competitor's feet, he sent the photos to the authorities, and in the morning news portals and social networking groups in the city were full of the news. A big businessman having fun with a model. Some even suggested that the woman didn't work in a modeling agency, but together with intimate services. After that, all of her previous employers disowned her. Then Mary began to be recognized on the street. Some even shouted swear words in her wake, and some openly laughed. That's how Mary learned what it meant to be humiliated. Ford, after all the commotion, broke off all contact with her. He didn't want to further discredit himself. In the end, Mary was left alone with her shame. Her friends tried not to see her, and the townspeople made fun of her. To somehow stay afloat after the divorce, she tried to get a job, but her fame caught up with her there. There was nothing left for the woman but to leave for another city and start from scratch, and quietly hope that in the new city people do not recognize her and do not remember the consequences of that revenge arranged by her ex-husband, whom she betrayed.